When you're playing a video game, what is it that you're really thinking about? Most of the time, it's whatever's happening in the immediate moment that's keeping your mind occupied. Like scavenging for resources, trying to solve a puzzle, keeping track of your health bar, or preparing for whatever challenge is right in front of you. And here's the thing, if that's all you're thinking about, if you never stop to wonder what's forward, then the game's guidance is working exactly as it should. That is the most ideal scenario because the best kind of guidance is the one that's so intertwined inside of the game that it's essentially invisible to us. Unless you focus your attention on it, you don't see it, you don't think about it, but it's always there, quietly keeping you on the right path so that the flow of the game never breaks. A well-designed world makes it feel like you're exploring on your own and carving out your unique path through this unknown territory. It convinces you that these are your discoveries, despite the fact that the game has already neatly laid everything out for you. But this does lead to a single question. What even is video game guidance? Well, that's a pretty broad question, and it's something that I found myself thinking about on more than one occasion. And being completely honest with you, this video originally started as something entirely different. It began with me taking a deeper look into how color guides us in games, in particular the infamous color yellow, and diving deep into that. But when I thought more and more about the topic of guidance in video games, I realized that there was so much more to explore. So much more that I find way more interesting. That being when a game makes guidance a real part of its world, instead of adding it almost like sprinkling salt onto an already finished dish. Now, I will get to that whole color thing later, but this video turned into something completely different from what I was originally thinking when writing the first draft of this script, because there was one game in particular that pushed me more into wanting to make this video instead. That game was Elden Ring, because it brought something to my attention that really interested me. In my mind, I've always just thought about guidance in games as these typical markers, like yellow paint splashed down on a ledge. This is in your face, it's easy to understand, but it's far from subtle. But then when I was playing Elden Ring, I realized something. The game doesn't use big arrows, there's no yellow paint everywhere, and there's hardly any NPCs to tell you where to go. Yet, intuitively, I just knew what was the way forward. And this made me think a whole lot about this topic. Because that's when I really realized that guidance in games isn't always about what the game shows you directly. Sometimes it's about what the world makes you want to do. Elden Ring is an absolutely beautiful open world game, which right after finishing the tutorial, plops you down into a broad world and gives you almost no directions. You'll learn that you're here for the Elden Ring, but exactly what that is isn't clear to you yet. But you are given a few goals straight away, to point you toward what you need to do. You're informed that you're maidenless, I know, without guidance, the strength of the runes, nor an invitation to the round table hold. But besides that, you're not given any real context. Just clues that these are things that you should seek out. But this poses another question. Okay, how? Well, there's still one more piece of information you receive, and that's regarding the Grace, which, quote, exists to guide the tarnished and lead them along the proper path. Their golden rays will guide you along your way. This gives us our first idea of where we're supposed to go. A golden ray appears in front of us, showing us a general direction. But that's it. There's no pinpointing on the map, and the direction is really vague. Admittedly, you do get this piece of dialogue, which does directly point you towards Stormveil Castle, however, it is easily missable by the player, as you have to speak to this character several times before you get this dialogue, and therefore it's not enough on its own to guide the player. So what does the game do? Well, it uses perspective and framing in order to make us naturally understand where we're supposed to go. As soon as you step into Limgrave, your eyes are automatically pulled toward these huge objects in the distance, the massive Erd-tree off in the distance, and the looming silhouette of Stormveil Castle. These landmarks pull your attention and dominate the horizon in a way that feels like they're really supposed to be there. But they're not just there for the beauty of them. They're there to guide you and serve as your markers in the world. Even if you completely miss the golden ray that the Grace shows you, you're still automatically pulled towards these objects. The Erd-tree feels monumental and almost untouchable, like a tree that reaches past the world itself, like something that you're not meant to reach yet. The castle, on the other hand, feels more accessible and immediate. It feels like a place that's not out of your reach. It's closer to you, grounded, and naturally positioned to serve as your next step. With how this is framed, with you seeing the castle immediately after exiting the doors, the game makes sure that your eyes focus on that thing and take note of it before your mind gets overwhelmed by anything else. Whether it be the tree sentinel down below or the vast open area to explore. This makes sure that the castle gets cemented into your mind. The game doesn't have to tell you that you should go there, you're just drawn toward it. And when you start to head in that direction, the game reinforces your choice, with the road naturally sloping upwards more and more the closer you get. The closer you get, the more the game escalates its signals and resistance, with soldiers patrolling and barricades that block the road, which all scream, this way is important and it needs to be protected. You feel the resistance growing, which we equate to closing in on a major goal. And if you decide to go somewhere else to explore the map and level up, regardless of if that's before ever reaching the castle or afterwards when you realize you need to level up so you don't keep getting bent over and slapped time and time again, the world still keeps Stormvale in the back of your mind. The castle sits high above almost everything else in Limgrave, at least everything that's immediately accessible, which means it's almost always looming in the background. And because upward generally equates to progress and the way forward, we understand that the castle is the way forward, since almost everything else slopes downward in Limgrave, while the path up to Stormvale is almost alone and constantly moving upward. And that's the beauty of how Elden Ring utilizes perspective to guide you. It makes Stormvale feel like the destination you chose out of your own curiosity, instead of just telling you to go there. You don't feel like you're following a waypoint, instead you feel like you're exploring and discovering the world. And when you finally reach it, whether underleveled and forced to leave for a while or strong enough to push through, it feels like your decision regardless, not the game's. As if this wasn't the destination you were always supposed to reach and instead a destination that you chose to reach. When in reality, the game has shaped the world around you in such a way that that choice was already made for you. Of course, Elden Ring utilizes this way of guiding you more than just in the beginning of the game, but going over the whole game would be a waste of time, since this already explores what perspective-based guidance is and how it can be used. If we look at a game that has a world that's a lot more closed in and linear, like the Resident Evil 2 remake, we get some other examples of guidance. The game itself takes place in large part within or under the Raccoon City Police Department, which on the surface, but also below, mostly consists of these long, narrow and dark hallways. And the way that the game guides you down the right place in these long hallways feels completely natural. The way it does this is that there's often some light at the end of the hallway, which sticks out when you have this otherwise completely dark environment. You're drawn toward this light, and it makes you realize that you're supposed to go there. But it's more than just some glowing light bulb in the distance. It's about how it contrasts with your immediate surroundings. This contrast between the oppressive, dark, and eerie environment with this glowing light is what makes it work. Light is something that we associate with positivity, and in a dark environment, we're drawn toward it. So it uses this to lead us forward. The light becomes both a visual anchor and also a psychological relief to us, which the game can also flip on its head from time to time, like in this hallway where the light itself actually guides you toward danger, but regardless it's still the way forward and the way to our eventual escape. It gives you direction without explicitly saying this is where you should go, unlike some other parts of the game, like this absolute abundance of yellow tape for example. Sometimes that light is a lamp, other times it's the faint glow of moonlight pouring through a window, or even the red glow of an emergency exit sign. All of these elements work as subtle nudges, guiding you deeper into the station while not breaking that immersion in the game's atmosphere. Here, you're not thinking about game design or level layouts, you're just a person trying to survive, with limited resources, drawn toward whatever scraps of light you can find in the dark. Much as you would in real life if you were stuck in that situation. Cling to the light and hope it leads you to safety. The contrast of the lights also make a huge difference. You can see the bluish lights clearly from the other side of the hallway. Same with the fire hydrant lights with the red glow that stick out, acting as breadcrumbs for you to follow. A really good example of this contrast is this part of the sewers, where you see this huge, red, ominous light lighting up a doorway on the other side of the room. The way that this is lit, you understand that it's an important place for you to go. But the red light itself also gives that eerie vibe, where it signals that you need to be prepared for whatever's lurking in the waters below. It's as much a warning as it is guidance. And through this, we understand that we need to go there, but should expect resistance along the way. You're told so much here just through the use of light and contrast. The Resident Evil 2 remake really does such an incredible job of conveying so many messages to you as the player within the world building itself. Environmental guidance is another form that, if done correctly, you don't actively think about while playing. In The Last of Us Part 2, as you're moving through Seattle, you in large part of the game move through Seattle following road signs, which makes it feel a lot more natural. On top of that, after entering Seattle for the first time, you spend a bit of time traversing a much more open area. But instead of using any kind of normal minimap, The Last of Us Part 2 instead uses a physical map that you pull out. It doesn't have a minimap with markers or highlights over certain areas. Instead it looks like an actual map which Ellie marks up with a pen, which it marks places of interest for you. Obviously you're being guided here. You're told where to go by Ellie drawing these question marks, but it feels a lot less obvious compared to, for example, the map you can use in the Resident Evil 2 remake, which in and of itself is supposed to be maps that you find, but are obviously very overlay, as to say. The Last of Us takes place in a world that is supposed to be the same as ours, if it got taken over by an apocalypse. Therefore, it needs to feel realistic in its world building in order to keep us immersed. While a fantasy game like Elden Ring, for example, could use the magic power of graces to guide us, that doesn't work for a more realistically built world like The Last of Us. So, how can the game achieve a similar effect? Well, right after exiting the theater in order to find the hospital that Nora is located at, Ellie looks at her map and says to herself,
"Right. If I follow Route 5, that should take me to the hospital."
At the same time as the game shows the sign that says Route 5 on it in a way that makes it impossible for you to miss. Now this little muttering to yourself wouldn't make sense in a form of guidance if we didn't also get the visual confirmation that comes along with it. And we follow these road signs along a large portion of the journey to the hospital. While yes, the path is quite linear in a way that it would be very hard for you to get lost, that's not the point. If we just follow this path for no apparent reason, it will feel strange. The game wants to show you why you're going the way you are. So following these road signs, much as you have many times in real life, makes things feel more real. As well, it helps guide you in place where you're unsure of what's forward and what's not. When you see this sign here in between these two buildings, you realize that it's the one on the right that brings you forward. A lot of us like exploring everything, so we want to know and understand what's forward, so we don't accidentally lock ourselves out of any content. And if you don't care about extra content and looking around and just want to get to the hospital, you can intuitively understand what's forward just based on these signs. Because guidance isn't just about you moving forward or keeping you oriented, it's also about making sure that immersion, pacing, and the atmosphere of the game all stay intact. If we compare this realistic approach to something like a glowing object guiding you forward, we can see a huge difference. Without these signs, we could still be funneled toward the hospital, but it would feel a lot more hollow. The signs transform the journey from a straightforward video gaming path to a believable route through a real-life abandoned Seattle. Each new sign we see is a small reminder of the fact that you're on track and that you're getting closer. You don't just feel like you're moving through a level, you feel like you're actually navigating a collapsing city in search of something that matters. This is what makes the guidance so effective. It doesn't simply point the way, it convinces you that the way itself has meaning. And it does this through the world itself. Eventually, the game also starts to give glimpses of the hospital, solidifying that we're on the right path, and that you're making progress. You see it looming in the distance, surrounded by collapsed buildings and such. It's never just dropped front and center like an obvious next level marker. Instead, the game naturally lets it be a part of the environment. That way it doesn't stick out and makes the city feel more real and makes it more mysterious. Alongside that, it works narratively. You see the hospital in these short moments, like Ellie herself is just taking a look to understand where she is, so she can make her way forward. And this works for you as the player as well. They're just quick glimpses, and that's really all you need here. Another thing that both the Last of Us games and the Resident Evil 2 remake does is use notes that you find lying around, which both advance the story by providing background information, but also in a lot of cases inform you about somewhere to go, or the answer to something you've been looking for. In both the Resident Evil 2 remake and the Last of Us games, you find these safes that contain valuable supplies, and have to scavenge around looking for some information lying around as to what the combination is. These notes in particular are generally notes that are supposed to have been lying around since before the outbreak, but they can also be notes written by, for example, people who are dying. I've seen people criticize especially The Last of Us when it comes to these notes, saying that it doesn't make sense for people to write things down on notes when they're dying, but I completely disagree, especially when we're talking about other things than just the safes. These notes do make sense. It feels logical that people would want to get their last thoughts down on some piece of paper, especially if they could tell their story or help someone they love. And like I said, with a lot of these notes, they're even supposedly lying around from before the outbreak. Same thing in Resident Evil, where it's information lying around from before the G-Virus. Like the note you find informing you that a safe has been moved to the West office, along with a code for it. This is another way for the game to guide you, through the world itself and through the story. I don't really like that the Resident Evil 2 remake highlights important information in green text, as it kinda makes things a bit too obvious, but at least it's the same concept here, where the information you need gets presented to you in a way that makes sense within the game world. And it's not as direct as giving you some marker for you to follow, where you could just find the safe instantly if you find the note first. Especially in The Last of Us, since it doesn't have markers like on the Resident Evil 2 remake map, so you get the clue through the note, and then have to find where to use that information yourself. It makes it feel like you yourself made the discovery, making the supplies feel more worked for, instead of just something that was thrown at you. And it's once again a really good way for the game to guide you, while also making it feel like a natural part of the world. Something in a similar vein is dialogue. It can also be a great way for a game to guide you forward while making it feel natural. Of course, a lot of games resort to the classic, I need to do exactly this out loud in a very on-the-nose way. While yes, this does absolutely serve to guide you forward, it feels like the characters are speaking to you as the player instead of speaking to each other or just thinking out loud. For example, in the Resident Evil 2 remake, you get a lot of this in the dialogue.
Damn. Need a key card.
It feels more like the game is talking directly to you as the player. This is not something just strictly tied to this game in particular, as this is something that happens in almost all games at some point, or at least in a large majority of games. A good example of guiding dialogue instead would be, for example, in Leon's story, where Marvin radios you because he wants to show you something. Here you see that Claire's outside, trying to get in, and Marvin tells you that you can get to the courtyard where she is through the east side of the second floor of the building. This is a great way for the game to guide you, while still keeping it feeling like a normal conversation. And this is the power that comes from 2 or more people interacting in a story. For some more examples on natural guidance, we can take a look at The Last of Us Part 1, where Joel might quietly mutter for himself,
This way. Oh my us out of this, come on.
Or Ellie will point out something that she thinks is this way, for instance. Just something as simple as a tone and voice shift to make it seem like the character is just thinking out loud can make a huge difference, especially when they're alone. Something like a little mutter to themselves instead of loudly announcing what's on their mind in a way that nobody ever would can make a huge difference.
Look out. It's just a short hike.
A good example is when you reach Billstown, where when you get your first view of the church where Bill most likely is, Joel mutters to himself,
Hey, you, Bill.
this just sounds like a character thinking out loud, like you yourself might in real life, muttering to yourself when contemplating something. The tone itself is important too, because it sounds more like Joel is talking to himself instead of talking to us, like he feels in some other games. And while this line from Joel just sounds like him talking to himself, it gives us the players a lot of clues. We can first of all understand that the church, just being at the center of focus in this shot, is where we're heading. And hoping to find Bill, we understand through this voice line that the church is the most likely place for him to be. This guides us to where we need to go, while also giving us a reason as to why we're going there. In this scene, Joel isn't alone, but something like this is also a useful way to tackle vocal guidance when a character is alone, since there's not much else to do. Contrast that to in the Resident Evil 2 remake, where Claire or Leon sometimes states the obvious like,
Alright, now back to Ada.
it serves the same mechanical function as Joel or Ellie pointing something out, but here it sounds like the game is just speaking directly to you. It's guidance, but with no attempt to hide it. You're already clearly shown here what you need to do, so having the character announce it out loud as well feels redundant. Especially in horror and narrative-driven games, immersion is incredibly important. The less you feel like you're being handheld, the more you feel like you're surviving on your own. A line like this bluntly breaks that illusion, as if the developer is giving you a nudge rather than Leon reacting to what's happening around him. But compare that to how Joel quietly acknowledges the church in the distance, you can see a difference. It fits naturally and reinforces the goal without destroying any of the atmosphere. Both lines serve the same function, but the difference in deliverance, tone, and context makes all the difference. When characters are working alongside each other, it becomes easier, with one of them being able to point things out to the other in a natural way, which acts as a reminder of your goals and to point you in the right direction. This is usually a lot better as well compared to just another character outright telling you what you need to do. If a character instead just tells you, maybe we need to use this somehow, it helps show you what you need to do while also letting you figure out the more intricate details on your own. But through all of this, you might have noticed that there's one pretty obvious thing that I haven't talked about yet, besides one pretty passing mention early on in the video, which is probably the most recognizable way for a game to guide you, and that is color. Color is a really powerful tool for a game to show you what's interactable, what ledge is climbable, where to go, or more. The most famous way that games use color is of course the classic and controversial yellow paint, which has then transformed to yellow wires, bars, doors, and more. There have been outliers of games that use different colors, but in general, yellow is the color that's most often used, because we as the player have come to associate it with telling you where to go and what you can interact with. And I've talked about guidance and making it natural and part of the world all through this video, but the thing is, it's really damn difficult. Developers are always faced with the problem of trying to guide players and making sure that they don't get lost. And while all of these things I've mentioned before, like framing and dialogue help, it first of all takes a lot more effort and time to design a game using only these kind of tricks and still make the player understand where to go. It's a whole lot easier and time efficient to just throw down a color, which is usually splashes of paint, to easily show the player what's interactable and where to go. But it also comes at the cost of ruining immersion. This does beg the question though, why yellow? Well, first of all, yellow stands out a lot. In a large majority of worlds, especially in Naughty Dog's games, where you have a lot of vegetation, neutral colored buildings, and whatever else it might be, yellow sticks out, so it grabs the player's attention. On top of that, it's also just a really eye-grabbing and popping color. Therefore, it becomes a natural choice for this purpose, since it's really hard to miss. Beyond that is a pretty neutral color when it comes to association. A color like red or green carries more weight behind it, since red can often signal danger, that something is locked, or that you should stop somewhere. And green signals that it's safe, that you gain access to something, or that you're able to keep going. While yellow is way more neutral. Ledges, interactable objects, and destroyable objects in a world full of otherwise indestructible objects all blend together. That's why this yellow paint came about in the first place, in order to mark things that the player might otherwise miss, and to make them understand that yes, this is destroyable, or yes, this is a ledge you can grab. But it also creates some really weird parts of games. And while I could just make more and more digs at how poorly some games do this, I think that you already get my point here. I'd instead like to look at a game that uses color and a whole lot of it to guide you, but makes it feel like it's a part of the world. The game Mirror's Edge uses the color red in this way. In an otherwise mostly clean, white, and sterile looking world, red certainly sticks out, and serves as a powerful directional tool. And in this game, a red pipe or door doesn't just feel obvious, instead it feels intentional. Mirror's Edge is very careful and deliberate in their use of the color, and although it sticks out a lot, the overall incorporation of it with the level design makes it feel natural. Not a lot of colors appear, but certain structures on the roofs, for example, are completely painted in a different color as well. Your brain can differentiate and understand that although those structures are painted too, they're not necessarily the way forward. But because they didn't choose to make absolutely everything look one way, and threw in red here and there, it makes it feel more natural. On top of that, in this hyper stylized world, this doesn't feel that out of place. Sure, the red pipes and poles are oddly colored in contrast to everything else, but so is also the blue railing and structures. And it also has the benefit of being this kind of futuristic looking world, that we don't really know how it's supposed to look. Through that, the game avoids the trap that many other games fall into, where everything has a certain natural look to it, with patches of vibrant paint just thrown over ledges and walls, as if somebody went through and painted these places just for you beforehand. Another thing that differentiates Mirror's Edge use in color guiding compared to a lot of other games, like the examples I gave earlier, is the fact that a lot of the red objects that you see, especially outside, are not actually red. The game explains the reason for these objects being red, since they look that way because of your runner's vision. Essentially, it's a visualization of Faith's understanding of parkouring, and her seeing what she can use to make her way forward. While she herself probably doesn't see it in red, these objects still are highlighted in her mind as important objects. That way, the red also makes sense within the context of the story. When you've used an object or passed it and then turn around, you will a lot of the time see that it's returned to its original color. And sometimes when approaching objects, you can see how they look before they turn red, and even see when they turn red. Making this highlighting be a part of the story does so much for immersion. The game even comments on this, since it gets that the red obviously sticks out. By acknowledging and giving the red guidance a purpose, it includes the guidance within the world itself, and makes it make sense within the context of the story. Unlike, for example, the abundance of yellow in The Last of Us, whether that be yellow paint or random caution tape that shouldn't be there. And when moving inside, generally either the walls or floor are colored red, but not only in the direction forward. Instead, they use a combination of that coloring, alongside spatial design of the hallways and rooms to funnel your perspective and create a sort of guidance system, to make you understand what's forward and what's not. It's not just the color that's doing all the work, it's a combination of that together with the actual design of the areas. It doesn't feel like you're being forced to just mindlessly look around for the next yellow ledge to grab or the next oddly colored boulder. Instead, it feels like you're learning the visual language of the world and naturally following it. And while you're following the game's direction, you're not constantly thinking about the fact that the game is telling you where to go. Instead, you're subconsciously picking up on those red elements while using your thinking on where to go next. Mirror's Edge also has an advantage here when it comes to making guidance feel like a part of the world because of the fast pace of the game. There's not really anywhere that you can stop, since you're constantly moving forward at a fast pace due to you being chased almost all the time. This means that first of all, the game has to make it so that you can easily identify where you're going next. Otherwise, you would just have to restart missions again and again trying to figure out where to go, which just isn't fun. And due to the fact that you're moving so fast, your brain is constantly being activated. You're looking for the next pipe, slamming through doors, looking at your path ahead and dodging bullets. Contrast that to a slower type of game where you're walking around locations trying to solve puzzles or find collectibles, and it's a lot more difficult for the game to not make you constantly aware of the guidance that it's giving you, since you have more brain power to dedicate to it. On top of all this, another major reason why Mirror's Edge succeeds in this while so many other games fail is the fact that in many locations, just because a path ahead is marked doesn't mean that it's the only path you can take. That in and of itself gives players the choice. For the people who just want to get through the levels, the red painted path will be what they choose, and it works well. And for the people who would rather spend that time making their own way forward to try and use all parts of the parkour that the game presents, they have their own way they can move forward. If you contrast all of this with games that just use a blunt solution of splashing down some paint everywhere where the player should go, you can see a stark difference. But I do want to make it clear that I of course understand that the way that other games do it of course also has positive effects. Mainly the fact that it allows the player to understand what's forward and what is interactable in places where it might otherwise be really difficult, especially if the player is not an avid gamer. But the problem for me comes when this method is used in such a way that the developers ignore using anything else to guide the player and just rely on this easy option. I've seen people propose the ability to turn off these yellow markers, but that doesn't fix anything either, since the game is designed with these yellow markers in mind and really heavily rely on them. Without them, since the devs haven't used any other ways of trying to guide the player would become lost. I'm fine with leaving these in the game if the devs designed the game with the ability to turn it off in mind from the beginning. That way, people who don't like it can remove it without becoming confused, and people who don't really care could keep it on for a more clear experience. Besides that, often in games you're faced with say 2 doors where one leads you forward, potentially causing a cutscene to happen which will close off the previous section, and one being simply an extra room for you to find some collectibles or supplies. I'm a person that wants to explore everything in a game, and I hate leaving any stone unturned. Therefore, when I accidentally progress the story because I simply didn't know what was forward or not, that's really annoying. It keeps me wondering, oh no, what was in there? Was it a cool note with cool lore, some more supplies which I really need since I'm running low here, or something similar? And in context, I don't think this makes something like a color guiding you inherently bad, if it makes sense within the level design. For example, say you're in an electrical plant with wires everywhere. Well, you could have a yellow one that just so happens to show you the way forward when there comes a point of no return, so you know where to go first. Since this way it's a part of the world and doesn't stick out in the same way. Or even better, ways such as a door being slightly opened, or vice versa, where it's the only completely closed door. We as players acknowledge that since this is the only door that's different, it most likely means it's the way forward. And through that, we can leave that one to last if we want to. Now, does the game need to do this every single time? No, especially if it's self-explanatory what forward is, such as, for example, say your goal is to make it up to a certain floor of a building. The staircase or a ladder will be what progresses you forward. You can figure it out with context clues. And if you still miss it, well, okay, it happens every now and then, and at least you were given the opportunity to figure it out beforehand. And it's more because you yourself failed to completely pay attention to your surroundings. But don't put players in situations where knowing the way forward is almost impossible, and putting something like a collectible behind the other door. Color guiding in and of itself isn't the problem, instead it's how it's used, like I explored. One of my favorite ways that a game has used a color, and the color yellow in particular, to guide you is actually in The Last of Us Part 2. We have to push this rolling trash can down a slanted floor. In order to get it underneath this gate, they have to manually pull up, which goes down as soon as you let go. In this area, there's a safety sign with a yellow caution marker on it, which looks completely natural, that warns you to not put the dumpster on the ramp, as well as 2 other completely yellow signs that warn you of the fact that the ramp is slippery, giving you another hint if you missed the first one. This makes complete sense within the game universe, as these signs feel very logical for a place to put up before the apocalypse, due to obvious safety concerns, while also giving you the exact instructions that you need, without just shoving the answer in your face. They use the color to draw your eye to it, and then cleverly tell you what to do through the sign, without breaking any of the immersion. Since yellow is also used for safety signs in real life, these signs make complete sense, and the color makes you notice them, which the game then combines with a similar concept to what I explored earlier with environmental guidance. Here, the color itself isn't what's guiding you, it's what's on the sign, but the color does guide you to the sign, and it draws your attention to it to begin with, and highlights the fact that it tells you something important. Now, does this work everywhere? Of course not, but it is definitely possible in most areas to incorporate something into the environment that makes sense, that still conveys the message of what you're supposed to do without just throwing down some yellow paint and calling it a day. Now, why don't games do this? Well, it's simple. It's a lot more difficult, and I get it. You might think that this is a waste of time. Games take long enough to come out as it is, and I get that. And that's why I mean that you don't have to do something like this for every single area. Sometimes, like the ledge you're supposed to grab being the only one that isn't overgrown, for example, is another natural, simple way for a game to convey where you should go, while also keeping the guidance a part of the world. And while it's not that creative, that's fine. I don't expect everything to be perfectly crafted all the time, but I feel like a lot of games could definitely do more. To round everything off, obviously I didn't talk about every single way that games might make guidance a natural part of the world, but I wanted to focus on the things that I think are interesting, and that I have personally experienced while playing games. What really fascinates me are these times where games put so much extra effort into designing their worlds in such a way that the guidance you experience simply feels like it's part of the gameplay itself, and not talking to you as the player. These design choices shape the feeling of playing the game. A marker might get you to your destination faster and easier, but it strips away the immersion of the game, and the feeling of making your own path in its living, breathing world. When the world itself becomes your compass forward, like I've talked about in this video, whether it's an eye-grabbing castle, road signs leading you forward, the quick mutter from a character, or a bright light at the end of a hallway, it makes the journey of getting to your goal so much richer and more engaging. Guidance doesn't have to shout at you to be effective. The best kind of guidance is the one that you never think about, because in the moment, you're just too busy taking in the world the game has built. A world that feels like you're the only and first one to traverse it. A world that's built just for you.